Gauri. Thank you so much for agreeing for this interview for our research on women in architecture. Just to give you a brief, what is this study about? The work is basically looking at the biographical journey of the women in architecture profession. So just to clarify, it's not a discussion or a study on what kind of architecture, what do they do, and things like that. The study basically focuses on the gender aspect of being women in the profession. Especially from the work which I have studied about women being in the profession, is that many women have diversified, and which on one hand opens the question about where architecture is delineated, or whether architecture has a larger meaning than just building, because most of the time we see architects to be those who are building, and I have always questioned that, limitation of the profession. And from the study, I also found that many women have actually diversified to a lot of areas which are related to humanitarian activities, related to ecological activities. And of course, many are in a combination of research and academics, or research and consultancy, or research and other aspects, activism as well. So based on this, I thought I will just document the journeys of these women, at what point they thought about changing, or what point they thought about continuing, and what it is being woman in this journey. So I have very simple questions, and the method is called autoethnography. So it's your biography and my pen. It's as simple as that. Okay. So I will start with the questions, and before that, I would like to take your permission of recording this session, as well as the plan is to make a manuscript, little coffee table book, to also write it. Of course, we will get your approval for both the options before we put it in the public domain. So Gauri, Dr. Gauri Bharat.
Sure.
Okay, all set? Okay,
yes,
so I really wish to take you back to many years ago when you were in high school, and what brought you to architecture?
Pure accident rather than anything else. So I don't think I had any ambitions in high school of this sort.
Your voice is very low, huh? So if you can.
Okay. No, I'll speak loudly. Is this clearer?
Yeah, better.
So no, so high school is I've always been interested in lots of things. So I don't think I had any idea that there was such a thing. In fact, even when I applied to university, I had applied for literature, for journalism, for art, architecture. So it was varied. I was sort of happy to go where I got admission. It was that sort of a thing. Eventually, it came down to having to choose between English literature and architecture. The architecture, I got admission first at CEPT. I'd already started. And so I continued. It is as accidental as that. Had the literature results come out first, I probably would have joined there and I would have been a literature graduate. So I think it's fairly open-ended like that. I think now looking back, I think the key thing that connects this, I've been very interested in finding things out. And I mean, this is sort of with the benefit of hindsight, I suppose that's why literature, I've been very interested in ideas. I'm very interested in language. I've always been quite fascinated by language. So I think those are the things that, but architecture happened because, I got admission. Everyone said CEPT is a good place to be. And so here I was. So
long journey since then. Since
Sorry?
then you are, I'm saying long journey since then you are glued to CEPT to a large extent.
Yes, I didn't think when I came here that, so like a lot of it has been kind of, being open to options and picking up things that seem to interest me. So now I joined as a student in 1997, so I'm still here.
You're still
Yeah,
a
that many
student.
years. So it's
A
quite a
grown-up
while.
student.
34 years. Yes, I'm a grown-up student now. But that's what I'm very interested in, reading, writing. And now I think no matter what I would have done, I probably would have veered towards research and academics, because
Yeah.
I worked. No, thank you. I worked at an NGO. I've dabbled in design for a few years, but I'm really interested in
Yeah.
the ideas part of stuff. So
So
I suppose
do
that's
you,
where I
yeah.
am.
Do you see it's like a convergence now where you wanted to also try literature, and now you are in architecture, so you have actually converged both the fields because you're extensively doing research and writing. So probably that way. Yeah. So I like to bring,
I don't.
sorry, please go ahead.
No. Please
No,
go
no,
on. I
no,
was just going to say, I
please
don't
go
know if
ahead.
it's a convergence, but it seems like the natural
Yeah,
process.
natural progress. Yeah.
So
So because the study is focused on women, being women in the profession, so I like you to remember your time in undergraduate and postgraduate when you were studying as a student. I know most of us did not really face this gender issue when we were student, both from the side of teaching and also from the side of learning. But I would still like to seek your memories and find out what was it being a girl in the profession. Did it really ever come in your cognizance, or were there any incidents where you were made to realize, or you felt that oh, being woman in this profession is something different? Was there any story or incident you may like to share with us?
So I think the early I sort of have a sense of having encountered that was when I was in practical training, because I was working on a site and there were only two women on the entire site. This was a large housing site, and the company that I was that whose site it was had a policy that they did not hire women, I think even as laborers. So on like a site with a few hundred people, I think we were only two women. And so there was a lot of curiosity. So people would stop and look as to what we were doing and things like that. But having said that, I studied in a girls' school. I was in a family with all girls. So I think I had been brought up with a fair level of confidence, to be able to not feel troubled by so that was a privilege of being brought up in a reasonably, and I think the school here was like that as well. So I wouldn't say that there weren't issues, it's just that the issues didn't affect me, but I know it affected a lot of the sort of relative invisibility of women in how architects were talked about. I'm sure it affected some of my uh, other colleagues, and now I can articulate why. So women were largely invisible. It's just that I was able to not be seriously disadvantaged or affected by that, because I I I'd been brought up and I was in environments where I could sort of do what I wanted to without worrying about, So I think that's the reason why it didn't make a significant in the sense that I can't think of a time when I have had to think about my choices because I can't do something as a woman. But I also realize that puts me in an extreme minority. I'm an extreme
Yes.
minority. I'm aware
Yeah.
of that. I think the first time when I had to sort of seriously think about it was when I started my PhD in 2011, because I had two children by that point, by that time. My older one was 2.5, and my younger one was 8 months old.
Wow.
So then I started my PhD when my Chotu was 8 months old. So there were a lot of surprise looks. I was reasonably sure about what I was doing, but there were a lot of surprise looks. How can you stay away from your children? Blah, blah, blah. So I think a lot of having to articulate and explain that as women can have multiple lives. So I can do this. And just because I'm a mother doesn't mean I'm constantly pining for the children. So when I did my PhD in the UK, so when I was there, I was focused on my work and I used to work 7 days a week. So I was making most of that time because I was away from the children. And when I was
Yeah.
here, I was. So I
You have
think that
to
is
make
the
use
typical
of the
that.
time then, because it is
Yes.
it's the it's the I will not say burden, but it is some expectation from the society for being a
Yes.
mother and a woman, and
Yes.
probably in a good intention, because for the child, and sometimes even the society and nearest and dearest people forget that it is also your life, you know but I like
I
to
think
just go. Yeah, sorry.
I'm not
Yeah, go
sure
ahead.
it's good intentions. It's just unexpected because it's not like my children were deprived. They were my husband and their grandparents were sort of so the children had a lot of love and affection. They were in a safe environment, so all of that was taken care of. And I don't think they are sort of emotionally scarred. So very often it was just unexpected for a lot of people, including
Yes,
my colleagues in the UK. Many of them couldn't understand that. They were like, how do you
yes,
manage?
this is a normal reaction.
Yes, yes. So I was like, I manage. So I think it had to do with people who were not expecting that.
Yeah,
But I think it's also it's not easy, but
yes.
it's not impossible. And if you have support, you can certainly kind of do this.
Yeah, it also matters that that there is a background support, which is not only ensuring you that support, but also motivating you to take that extra mile or steps to go ahead. I just want to go a little bit back when you were talking about your immunization because of coming from a family with girls, or you know because I also belong to that kind of background. At no point we were raised as if it is a limitation to be a girl, although there was family pressure all the time that you are a girl, you are going to do architecture or engineering, which was slash engineering, so how will you manage and so on. So and you rightly mentioned that even though in our cognizance we had this awareness that there is this gender issue, but it did not bother us. And I think that's a very important point. So we were consciously aware of it, but it was not probably hampering our decisions or moves, whatever we take in our lives. So just to take it further from your graduation and between PhD, I just want to recall a situation where you were coming closer to end of your undergraduate and masters. How were you looking at life as how to get started? Was job an option? Was practice an option? How was it? And also looking at the gender issue about it, because by then we know that practicing as solo woman or in partnership are two different ball games, or doing a job becomes much easier, transition into profession.
Yeah. So again, partly, so before I finished my thesis, I was offered a job as a research assistant, which was
Mm-hmm.
very interesting because that was my introduction to with actually Professors Miki and Madhvi Desai. And
Okay.
that was my introduction that acha, you can also do research. I enjoyed reading and writing. I loved doing thesis. So the fact that something like that was possible was a very big eye opener. But
Yes.
after that, and I had also decided to do a master's degree uh, because there was that question of I knew I wanted to go abroad. I had been on exchange earlier, and I had a sense of just how eye-opening it is. So I was quite clear I wanted to go abroad. But I also knew that I did not. So the only thing I knew is that I didn't want to live abroad. I wanted to come back to
Yes.
India. Come back and do what? I don't know. I didn't know. But I knew that I wanted to come back. So I worked with Nikki and Madhuri, and then I worked with Kiran Pandya for a few months. Uh, Can you hear me, Mansee?
Yes,
Your
I can
screen?
hear you, but your video has got stuck. Now it's moving.
Ah,
I
yeah, yeah,
remember
yeah.
when you went for exchange, you were in undergraduate when I was doing my postgraduate and you were going for exchange. You may not recall, but I remember now.
Yes. So I had, I knew what a sort of kind of mind expanding experience it was. It was quite so I knew that I wanted to do a master's. I also knew that I did not want to do it in design. um, I wasn't clear. Now, again, in retrospect, if I had to do it again, I would have opted more clearly for a degree in history or museum studies or something like that. But at that point in time, I didn't know. So I went in for a master's by research. My parents also were sort of by then saying, you want to consider getting married and things like that. So I knew that at some point in time, I hadn't decided that I won't, but I knew that at some point in time, soonish, that is
It
something
will
that
come.
I'll have to take a call on. So I think it was sort of fairly open-ended. I was kind of just, there were no clear plans. I think the only thing is there were no
Will you
clear
call it
plans.
flowing? Will you call it flowing as life unfolded?
Yeah, yeah. And I think what helped there, again, this was sort of its retrospective effect. What helped was that I did not have any major financial obligations. So my master's was fully funded, my PhD was fully funded. And that allowed me to flow. Had I come back with a major debt, then
Yes.
I would have had to commit to taking up a job which I may or may not have
Yeah,
liked.
compromise
I think,
probably. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
And that
this
is a
is why
big
even
support to have a scholarship,
yes, yeah. So that made a lot of difference. So I didn't have, so a lot of my friends had to stay back in Singapore to pay the debt, student loan, etc. But I didn't have to do that. So I came back and I
Yeah.
sort of tried jobs with NGOs, this, that. So I think that made a lot of difference. So there were some choices that I consciously made,
Yes.
which is that I wanted to keep my options open.
Yeah.
But
We sailed the similar boats, you probably with scholarship. On one hand, there is this freedom, but at the other hand, many people stay back and they see life very differently in terms of, going further or going abroad and things like that. So we had to come back. I had the similar situation, by the way. So
mm,
when you were before PhD, you got married. You are already working, and you had your little angels already walking in your life. How were you really balancing your work, life, family, and everything? You did mention you have a very good support, but I can imagine already Ma Durga with many hands and doing all those stuff. But I just want to hear from you. How were you managing it's not easy with two little kids and also doing your work, and then of course taking care of the house. So what was I mean, if you can describe probably a one day of your schedule, that will be good to know. So,
so there were some fairly simple principles actually.
yes,
Basically,
what are those?
I would write whatever I had to write before the children woke up.
Okay.
So I would write from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning. And also, um, I would break tasks up into the amount of time I had. So I would write 500 words every day. So if I had to write a chapter of 10,000 words, I knew, give or take a few days, within about a month, I would have one draft of the chapter written, which
The
I,
self-discipline.
like, discipline से ज़्यादा sort of really pig-headedness, भले बकवास, but लिख
Yes,
देना है.
करना है कुछ.
हाँ, because and it's ridiculous as it sounds. I realize that especially with research, at the end of the day, external deadlines will only help so much,
Yes.
because the quality of your, it is possible to write a book which is not very good. It is possible to get it published also. How good you want to make a work depends on how much effort you want to put
Yes.
into it. So a lot of that, and also, so I would write typically from 5 to 7 in the morning. And I was also teaching at SEPT.
Yes.
So, so in terms of, sorry, one second. Sorry.
No issue.
So in terms of the day, I would typically write in the morning, send the kids off to play school, whatever. Then I'd come to SEPT. And so my PhD work then didn't happen. Whatever PhD work had to happen, happened between 5 and 7 in the morning.
Okay.
So throughout the day, there was nothing else. But the key difference was also that I spent 2 months, 2.5 months in the UK, and then I came back to India for 4 months. So the time was when I was in the UK is when I would do all my library research and this and that and everything. So then when I was back in India, then it was really just writing and fieldwork. So fieldwork also, I would plan it over extended weekends and things like that. So I would go on Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I would finish fieldwork, come back on Sunday night. I think it was fairly crazy. Now that I think about it, it was fairly crazy and there was no letting up because there were no breaks because there was always, and I started my PhD in 2011. By then it was almost essential to finish a significant part of your work within three years. If you needed an extension, you needed special permission. So I knew that 3 years I had to submit a draft of my thesis, which I did. But it had to do with the fact that, I'm working on a tight schedule. My funding was for 3 years. My visa was only for 3 years. So I got a visa exactly for 36 months.
Wow.
So I think a lot of this went into, I just have to be more focused about my work. So I think it helped me develop crazy levels of focus. But it was also, now I realize I don't, now I can't do that.
Yes.
It's very difficult to separate that kind of very high intensity work. I did it for 4 years, but
Not anymore, thank you. So,
no, now I'm consciously trying to work a lot more slowly because that was just crazy.
yeah, I think PhDs go like this for some reason, especially if you are really immersed into your subject, and then you have these overlays of of your work, and then you have family work too, of course, which cannot be compensated with any other thing. So at some point in time, you feel that the family work is first, and then anything else can sit. So are you still continuing with this 5 to 7 writing habit, or you have changed that?
No, I now I don't. It's far more difficult
Yes, I
to,
can imagine.
especially because now I set my own deadlines for writing.
Yeah.
So it's also far more difficult to convince myself to. So I still work with fixed chunks of writing. So I still plan it out because you can't write large sections. So I still write a lot and it is still reasonably condensed. But now I've developed other ways. So I put my draft notes together. So I spend far more time putting my draft notes
Yes,
together.
we
My
learn.
run up to the final writing is far more now. PhD के time में तो analysis भी चल रहा है, writing भी चल रहा है, everything is happening together. I'm making drawings, I'm doing references. All of that was far more mixed up. So I would try and do that during the day, and I would try and write first thing in the morning. So the same sort of a thing, I've spread it out now to that I spend. So the making notes, exploring ideas, all that I spend far more time now. But I
You
still
are
try and
scribbling,
find key
scribbling,
writing
scribbling, huh?
moments.
Every time in your little notebook, what to do, what not to do.
Yes.
Are you doing
Yes.
that? And cutting those lines. Yes, I was about to show you. Are you really doing like this, scribbling and cutting and scribbling and cutting? So
So
it's
that
a habit,
is
like
that
self-organization.
yeah. So separating out the tasks of also like when I have to sit and read a piece of writing versus when I have to write my own notes,
Yes,
mental energy required is very different.
very different.
So I still mostly write in the morning. I never write after lunch, irrespective of what I'm doing. There just isn't enough mental space.
Yes,
So
I can
writing is still
imagine.
very intense. I still like on the rare occasion when I'm really stuck very close to a deadline, which has happened a few times during the pandemic, then I've had to kind of pull through, write in the evenings and all, but the quality of writing suffers.
Yes,
So,
I can imagine that. So I would like to go to another interesting question for you. Some life-changing moment and decisions which you made, which actually shapes you what you are today. I'm sure PhD is one of those decisions, but I'm sure there are many other as well.
the PhD is certainly one of them because it was, I mean, intellectually, it was a hugely transformative experience. And yeah, it's in the sense it was an introduction to a very different world of academia.
Yeah.
Uh, Not just in terms of other English scholars, but people who were studying in London and Scotland, and so it was very that was certainly very big. I think coming to Ahmedabad was obviously I mean, that was not out of choice. I mean, partly out of choice, but it was a series of situations where I ended up here. Otherwise, I would have been studying literature, like I said. So that I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's just that, in the sense, I can't think of one or two
Yeah,
kind of
I can imagine that. But any
life-changing.
other people who moved you yeah, in your directions of your career, or any people who really made a huge impact in the way you look at life or your career or your profession?
So, I mean, again, there are loads of people.
I can imagine.
Loads of people. I think my colleagues here in the Faculty of Architecture, certainly, because I do look up to many of them in terms of, how they have. I've discussed my PhD work with them, my books with them. So, I mean, in terms of academic work, it's been very interesting. Personally, my family, so certainly my husband, there are days when I'm thinking, ye karna hai, wo karna hai. He'll be like, "Arey kar le, soch mat itna." So I think he's been a very useful trigger. And yeah, so I think different members of the family, again, there are, I'm really sort of open to picking up stuff from so many different people. And there are some senior colleagues who I really admire for the ways in which they've been able to cut back on their commitments and say, I will do only so much. So that has been very useful. Useful in the sense that, there are these moments when you are reminded of your pride. And my kids have been telling me that. So I think they will tell me things like, you're only physically present here. You need to be mentally present with us. And suddenly I'm shaken out of that. So they've really been sort of given me a lot of perspective
It's a
that this is
correction
important.
scale, huh? Correcting scale. The kids may be like,
Absolutely. There was once when my son was calling me to do something, and I said, no, I have to go get Kothmir. And he simply said, Kothmir is more important or I am more important? And I'm like, oh, well, yes. How philosophical statement. Of course, you are more important. So when they say stuff like that, you're forced to stop and listen. Ki, हाँ, वैसे तो ठीक बोल रहे हो. So it's been, so they've been very important.
it's good. I mean, they also become your mirror, no, to large extent.
Absolutely.
So it helps to really reflect again, time and again. So I just want to ask another question related to, this. I know you are again one of those minors, I will say, in this field who had lesser of these challenges probably, but still the physical and psychological aspect of being in this profession. How do you see that? Knowing that women for a long time were invisible in this profession. Still, it is an issue, and it is now discussed more often than when we were graduating. So I just want to know your views on that.
So I think considering that I don't practice, I have a lot of views on practice. And I think the most important one is long hours of work. It's a huge myth that long
Yeah.
hours of work lead to better productivity.
Yes.
or that, working like crazy before deadlines. Uh, I was never comfortable with it. And it so happened that the only place where I worked for any serious length of time is with Kiran Pandya. Kiran Pandya was incredible because he would work Monday to Friday and he would work from about 10 o'clock to 6 o'clock.
We have the
And,
same.
I challenge anyone to say that he was less productive than some of the other architects.
Yes.
He was just incredibly organized. And I think the most important thing is he set deadlines in reasonable ways. So, the contractor will keep calling saying, drawing chahiye, drawing chahiye. So I would go and tell ki, sir, he's asking for the drawing. He said he's not going to start casting this for another 15 days. Let him ask for the drawing. We will send it when we are done. So that ability to pace your work, it is something so basic that it's incredible that the architectural profession has turned it into a badge of honor
Yeah,
to
no.
work all nights and to work ridiculous hours. It makes no sense at all.
Yes. But I think we are actually enslaved with it right from undergraduate, whole day we are having fun and then we are working for whole night and, and making it a big hoo-ha about it that, oh, we worked whole night and things like, and that gets, translated. But in our office also we are sharp 11 to 7 and that's it. There's no extra minute. We have to just push people out of the office. So no
That
extra work.
disadvantages women a great deal. So the moment you multitask, it disadvantages women a great deal because men are going to go back to dinner in many cases cooked at home. They wake up in the morning,
Yes.
you're going to find clean clothes. But for people who are doing that back end of work, not
Yes.
having planned out your work can be a huge disadvantage. And I mean, it's something so basic, but really that lies at the crux of why fewer women can practice. The
Yes.
idea that as an architect, you have to be available at all times, you have to be in that creative mode
Yes.
at all times, assumes that you're living in a hotel or something where all your
Yes.
other needs are taken
Yes.
care of.
It's the biggest myth. It's a myth
Exactly.
actually. But
Yeah,
many
yeah.
architects are practicing in that mode. Yeah, so we were talking about the psychological and physical aspects of being woman, and you really portrayed it very well. That brings me to a very tricky question for you. Maybe again going back to some years of life. Uh, would you really share some situations where you actually made an opportunity out of being a woman in the profession? Do you realize that we sometimes are in the advantaged position being women in some decisions or in actions or some things?
I'll have to think. I can't. As in, nothing comes to mind at the moment, but I do know that the only thing I can think of is when my children were younger. I remember very often, whenever there would be meetings and things which were late in the evening, then I would say that I can't attend. And I remember when they were very young, I remember when I was breastfeeding my older one. And I just had to be back home between 5 o'clock and
Yes.
6 o'clock because she had to be fed. And I remember walking, excusing myself from reviews, from meetings, from everything, saying that I have to go. And I would request that, we really need to have meetings that are more focused. We can't have meetings that, go on for 2-3 hours simply because I need to plan. So I remember once one professor at that time saying, "अरे जब student थे तब तो यहाँ रहते थे." I said, "हाँ, तब मुझे breastfeed करना नहीं पड़ता था. अभी करना पड़ रहा है. तो मैं क्या करूँ?" So that is one clear incidence, and I have sort of outright said that I'm sorry, but I really need to be excused. I cannot come for meetings. I cannot stay after hours, and I realized that being able to say that no was also like, had I been in some other setting, because I know in corporate settings and things like that, it's far more difficult to be able to outright say this. But that I clearly remember that I have done. And also at that point in time, however, we were requesting creche and working with requesting the set management to set up creche.
Yes.
So that was part of
Yeah.
this was together with Jigna, who was
Yes.
also had a second kid at that time. So I think that we were certainly doing. Apart from that, I'm trying to remember.
That's a big contribution from you girls, huh? That you managed to mobilize this gender discussion even in the campus, which looks very gender neutral from externally, but to have this gender discussion and then mobilize, all things which are required for, senior ladies to be more, inclusive in the system. And now you are
That's a work
spearheading
in
those
progress.
activities. Yeah, I am aware
That's a
of
work in
the gender
progress.
cell, which you guys are really nurturing since long time now. Um, so it's an opportunity also in a sense that you were able to speak about it very frankly, and I'm sure you have experienced it also in UK, and I have seen also everywhere in the world that people are not embarrassed to talk about it, which used to be a situation in our case, but now we are also getting immunized as women, and we talk very straight about it. Listen, we have to just go and do our domestic chores. It can be anything. And sometimes now I am hearing men also saying, and it really feels very good. I think somewhere we have to really bring our family, our personal life also into the discussion of our professional being, because these are not two different things. They are eventually one thing about our being in this situation. So because you talk about history and theory related to architecture, I just want an additional question from answer from you in this matter, as particularly in gender aspect. Why do you think, apart from this, of course, social cultural structure we have in the country, why this profession has been always this, gender skewed in terms of the way we look at the gender, as well as the way we look at the profession? And we are not even talking about non-binary gender even in our profession till date. But has there been much had gone into talking about this issue in our profession? What does our architectural history talk about it?
Now there are a lot of conversations. I mean, there are lots of volumes on women in architecture, and so there is certainly that, and also various other minorities diversifying of architectural discourses, pedagogy. That's happening now for sure. Questions of race, climate change, gender, sexuality. I'm not sure whether it's a dominant thing in the Indian subcontinent. I'm not sure. I don't think that is the case. So here it
Okay.
is still, architectural discourses are still very formalist. They are
Yes.
still about form and elite projects. They're
Yes.
far less, in the sense, and I mean in dominant discourses, in the sense
Yes.
that most people in the country will acknowledge that this is an important thing. That I don't think has happened in India.
Yes.
So I think in that sense, we've got a while to go. As to why the profession is fundamentally, I think it has to do with, and this is my sort of impression, not analysis in any way. I think a lot of professional practices are still anchored very strongly in personal and social networks.
Yes.
Rather than in more institutionalized forms. Because whenever if professions where people are employed in more formalized institutions are to some extent now you are working within specific professional expectations to some
Yes.
extent. Like if you
Yes.
consider law, medicine, or whatever, like
Yes.
they are still within architectural practices remain very informal. The moment they are informal, which is not to say it's arbitrary, it is still structured, but it is
Yes.
structured then by social relations. And so then women's social agency remains dependent to some extent
Yes.
on their male relatives. So then you are to a large extent bound by, and of course, so women who have social agency can exercise that. Women who have reduced social agency will struggle to set up practice.
Practice as
Whereas
in
if this was
practicing as in building, because that's where I am already questioning the architectural practice. Why architectural practice is limited to thinking in terms of building, So
so
why
that is also
architect, yeah,
something that a majority of people are doing.
perceiving it, and also
Yeah, so that is what most people are doing. I don't know what the numbers is, but I'm guessing out of a class of 80 now, 70 of them are likely to go into some kind of design practice. Again, it's a vague number. Of course, some will diversify, some may go into planning, some may go into urban design. There are those allied professions, but
yes.
still the space of practice.
Yeah, so it's in the built, they would like to be in the built environment zone, maybe different allied fields. Oh, that's good to know, but the number is different, a little bit.
No,
Much
I
more
don't know
people
what the number is.
diversify than people stay in practice, especially if I talk about women. And you rightly pointed out, and I can relate it with my life, because this whole study started with the purpose that I was looking for reflections so that how women are managing to stand on their own despite not being called architect or not having that social, I will say, proficiency to really go out and get their work, done, or even get new work for themselves. And especially for people like us who have been in the shadow of spouse, it becomes all the more challenging. So I didn't ask about your spouse, whether he is from the same field or different field, and if that matters to you in your profession. How is it?
So he is an architect. He has a practice, but I think since I started teaching, so since I started doing my PhD, I think we've sort of, our professional trajectories sort of became quite distinctly different, because I was not actively designing. Um, I was only interested in design as a subject of study. I don't design myself. And so for that reason, we have our two separate paths in a sense. He's a practicing architect and I'm a full-time academic. So even though we both trained as architects, our journeys have been quite different.
Yeah, but do you see convergence for people like us who are doing practice, who are teaching, who are doing in academics? Especially for people like you, I will say it is both academics and research, and they are two completely different fields. They do have convergence, but they are also divergent fields. So often, a lot of women architects who have really excelled in their career, I will say, have done very good in academics as well as in research. Of course, there are practitioners, but just because we are talking to you today, I would like to know your views on that. Many women professors, as well as researchers, or who are also activists, many of them have turned into activists, have done exceptionally well in their respective fields also, if they have not gone to build a building, which is our perception of architecture. So, I will call it also a diversification, because we also have to break this myth through this work that architecture is not about building. Because have you faced a situation where you are not called architect, you are a teacher? That was my starting point actually to do this research.
So that's the thing. No, I don't deal with too many architects right now. So, and again, I think it wouldn't bother me.
Yes.
Is the more important thing, for the simple reason, and again that also has to do with the if, our professional trajectories are cumulative.
Yes.
And there is a specific, so I read, write, and more, at least in the past 3 or 4 years, more and more of it is, so in the like 2000, my PhD also was with a live site. I mean, there were
Yes.
villages, but more and more, I'm currently working on archival stuff. So I'm working on the 19th century and the early 20th century. So, and my project at the moment is sort of very, very architectural, in the sense that had I not trained as an architect, I couldn't have done this.
Yes.
So, I am returning more strongly to questions of construction and history and labor structures and the knowledge of an architect, and so sort of fairly fundamental questions. So it is, yeah. So in fact, I was joking with my structures professors that, 20 years ago, sitting in your structures class, I would have never thought that I'm going to be worrying about how reinforcements are done and how reinforcements are tied together. Jitna I'm obsessing about it now.
Yes.
So I think, in the sense that I know now how much my work is very, very architectural in terms of what I'm dealing with.
That's the important point, We need to redefine architecture itself when we are talking like this,
Yeah, so
the
that
scope of architecture.
So that is what, and I've shared, and I'm finding things out that I know. Like I was telling Surya Kakane the other day, there have been these experiments in brick construction. So I'm having very fascinating conversations with architects who are interested in questions of detailing and technology and materials and things like that. Because I have a very particular historical perspective to offer.
Yes.
So that dialogue is possible. And because of that, I'm reasonably confident about, having said that, I've had to do it also because, when I'm teaching an architectural history program, I have to constantly try and articulate what is the relevance of what I'm doing. And why should somebody study something like this? So I think partly in that professional role also, I've had to clarify what this is and why this is important. So in that sense, trying to constantly, why is it important not just to build, but also think about the ways in which architecture is discussed, the ways in which architecture is talked about, which is what historians and theoreticians do.
Yes. So we are relying on you to change the architectural discourse, especially the scope of architecture. So I will pull a line from your initial talk about when you started your training. You said that it was all all men on the field, and you were two girls there. And from there, it's nearly, I guess, 2 decades. And even then, I can tell you by data, half of the laborers were women laborers, but probably in the project and office where you were engaged, it must be a different scene. Today's data already talks about that there are more women laborers on the ground, and especially low skilled laborers are predominantly women. So we do have women force already in the field of built environment, even if they are not designated architects and so on and so forth. So we do have our presence there. It's all about visibility. So I'm sure you do realize that we have come a long way. Even in our own career, we can see how we have made our place in the profession. So there is a penultimate question which is a bit tricky. You may laugh it out, but I'm sure you would like to take the question as well as take it in a more futuristic way, because most of the questions were taking you to the yesteryears. So I want you to imagine a situation where all the leading architects and designers and decision makers are women in the country. How would the cities look? So I'm replacing all the male architects, leading architects, and putting all the female heads there. Okay.
And being a proper researcher, my answer will be that women can also be patriarchal.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessary that you just replace the men with the women and suddenly by magic, we have a very different kind of environment. There is a lot of writing which has imagined societies, communities, places that have been built up by feminist logic. So I think if we simply replace men with women without changing anything else, there can be other forms of exclusionary
Yes.
practice. There can be other kinds of hierarchy.
So it is more
Having
about
said,
masculinity or femininity, huh? Than
I
woman or
think,
man. Hmm.
and I think it is about recognizing, so men can have feminine
Yes.
subjectivities, women can. So I think it is really about recognizing the need to be inclusive, acknowledging difference. And I think that, so when you have a bunch of people who are able to acknowledge difference and work together through those differences, then we are really talking about being able to have a environment that is more inclusive, in the sense where people from different orientations are able to have a dialogue with each other, arrive at a consensus in terms of uh, what works for most people, and creating spaces where others who don't fit in within that paradigm, they can still have a place. So
Yeah, but I would still like to press this question, especially more to men and women, for my own understanding. So to again stress on, imagine all women are at all the big offices and taking decisions for all the big projects and everything, all infrastructure. And you rightly mentioned it is not about women as long as patriarchy stays. But what kind of cities women can make if all women and either patriarchal or even they are different, diverse.
So I don't think all the cities, I hope all the cities will be different. And because again, your question assumes that there will be one kind of city if there are all women. We
No.
don't know what the paradigms will be different, but a much favored, one of my favorite references, which in fact each year the students have worked on it also, is a book called Sultana's Dream,
Hmm.
where by Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, so where she's imagining. So she's generally imagined that technology, I mean, some of the key things she imagines are that technologies are harnessed for the betterment of people, where um, I can't remember what the others are. There are sort of bits and pieces that I like. That environments are generally more beautiful, in the sense that they are more gentle, not pretty, but sort of more wholesome, more beautiful. So there are certain things that she throws up which I think are very interesting ideas. But on the other hand, I suppose what your question is also asking is, which are the current paradigms that need to get dismantled
Hmm.
in order to imagine something else. So it's not, then it hopefully is not big projects. It's projects which impact large numbers of people in meaningful
Yes.
ways. I suppose there are some key paradigms that will need to change, because a lot of big projects are fundamentally inequitable. They serve few people at the
Yes.
cost of dispossessing large numbers.
Yes.
So those
So
paradigms should hopefully change.
more inclusive approach will be there. You were already
Yeah,
mentioning about the inclusiveness also in the decision making, which may get penetrated into the implementation of the initiatives which are taken for the city.
yeah.
Interesting. That brings me to the last question. I'm really happy that you are answering them with your open mind, knowing that it's a very relaxed discussion. We are already seeing a change in our own lives when we were student, and today we see younger generation. And I'm sure you are seeing that big change, maybe not in the number of students. As I recollect, from my time we were same number of girls entering the graduation, and I mean, so it did not really change today. It's very much similar number of girls and boys are joining, so it's very gender balanced in the institutions. uh, However, we have to yet see what will be the change in the professional outline after this, when The girls are definitely different today, and the boys are also definitely different today than 20 years ago when we were studying. So I would like to really request you for a message to the younger generation, all genders. How can this profession be made little bit more inclusive at both ends, even in practice as as individuals, but also at the delivery end of making cities more inclusive, as you mentioned. So what kind of message would you like to give, especially on the practice side, that how can we be more inclusive, how can women be more accommodated in the profession? What's your message for the younger generation?
I, s- I suppose some of the key things which I also try and do in the class is
Yes,
to encourage people to collaborate a lot more
yes,
and to acknowledge, to give and acknowledge, to give and receive help as much as they can, which again, it seems very basic, but it is not something that we teach at all.
yes.
Um,
Collective working
we-
is not taught in architecture.
yeah, and in fact, we have to encourage students, and I learned that from one of my colleagues actually. He would say, copy karna hai to karo. और बोलो कि कर रहे हो एंड दूसरे वाले को भी बोल दो कि तुम्हारा आइडिया अच्छा है हम कॉपी कर रहे हैं the other person will mostly take it as a compliment
Yes,
rather than feel offended and doing that develops a healthy respect for people that you're working with, so because then you're not thinking ki you're going to steal somebody else's project because you want to do it, you
that's a huge
recognize, you
burden, huh?
develop.
In architecture, it's a huge burden to hide where
But
did you copy from. So,
no, but that's what it, because from childhood, you're not taught to collaborate. The moment
yes,
you learn to collaborate, you develop the entire, because the entire professional ecosystem is competitive at the moment. It's not collaborative. But that comes out of acknowledging, learning to acknowledge, learning to ask for help, and learning to take help.
yes,
And that I would imagine is it's something that we all have to help. We have to learn to do it ourselves. We have to learn to train people to do, and to be respectful of when you're receiving help, when you're taking help, be respectful. But I think learning to take and
acknowledgement. I
receive help.
think that's your research background saying, huh, Gauri? Because if you are in the consultancy zone, this is still not really prevalent. Huh?
It's
This is
not
our
that much in
research
research.
background, huh? Where we want to acknowledge people and then take the body of knowledge further, even if it is in design.
Also, not always, not always. The research field can be equally competitive.
Yes,
But I think that is certainly a feminist thing. That much I can tell you, because part of the reason why, again, within school, within the campus, the my set of colleagues, we've extended support to each other in many ways, and so you know that you can reach out to people. समझ
yes,
में नहीं आ रहा है how to give an assignment, I know I can go and discuss with a handful of them too, and and they will help. So I think that, I also realize that this is not something that happens automatically. This has to be cultivated.
yes.
You have
It's
to actively
part of the
set
it
up
has
conditions for collaboration.
it has to be part of the pedagogy as well. I mean, we
Yes,
try in
yes,
architecture for a long time, especially in urban design, in conservation, in planning. It is taught time and again, but it has to be really told
yes,
to
yes.
them. Really good, huh? Because I feel architecture has the possibility to connect people, because the profession is such that you have to connect right from the decision maker to the person who is the smallest unit, who is the labor, you know.
Yes,
So we
yes.
do have that, not only possibility, but I think we also have the power to really exercise this connection. It's not only among architects, but also be among different, agencies involved in the profession, because, and that collective action has to be taught, We can't be
Yeah.
one man army. No architect is one man or one woman army, even if it is portrayed like this in the profession
Yeah.
very much. And I think so from that individualistic approach, it has to move to collective, profession. So I think that's part of that.
And it has to be precipitated by those who are currently in power. It cannot be
Yes,
precipitated by those who are excluded. So the
yes.
architect as the individual who often gets credit
Hmm.
for the success of a work and also flack for failure.
Hmm.
I think they need to lead on acknowledging, honestly acknowledging everything that contributes to
So
work.
yeah,
So
it's, I think,
that
the
would be
boss
my,
and leader, no? It's the difference between the boss and leader. So
yeah,
we are
yeah.
looking for more good leadership in architecture probably, and that may be more inclusive in future. So maybe we
Yeah,
have to teach leadership also to our younger generation. That's our additional responsibility.
yeah,
Empower people around you, You not only
yes.
ask for support, but you also lend support to people whenever it
Yes.
is needed for. We come to the end of our conversation.